my anointed one always. Then everyone left in your family line will come and bow down before me for a piece of silver and a crust of bread and plead. Appoint me to some priestly office so I can have food to eat.
Okay, so Eli here is the high priest, and you can see this is a judgment, and his line is becoming the lowliest of priests in Israel. This starts out with a man of God coming. Now that is a term for a prophet. It's used primarily in the books of Samuel and Kings, and I have the references up there, some of them at least, where this term is used for prophet. And it connects this prophet back to Moses, because Moses is several times called Moses the man of God. And so in Deuteronomy and Joshua, in 1 Chronicles, Moses is called the man of God. So this is not just somebody who's particularly godly or pious or something like that, but in the Old Testament, it's a term that's synonymous with being a prophet. Now, here we have a prophet who's unnamed. We have several of them in the Old Testament. That a prophet shows up. He's not given, his name is not given to us. And so we don't know who this prophet is. Unlike, say, Samuel later on, who will be a prophet. We know, his name. Sometimes these prophets are just anonymous. And the point here probably is the author doesn't want to concentrate on the identity of the prophet. He wants us to concentrate on the message of the prophet. And so he prophesies against Eli and against his house. Eli had an ancestral privilege. He was descended from Aaron. The priests all had to be descended from Aaron, and the high priest was chosen from among them. And Eli apparently is from this line that started with Aaron. Aaron went down to through several other high priests until it got to him. The high priest would serve, once he was installed, he would serve for life. Unlike the other priests who would retire at age 50. The high priest would go on, and it was quite a privilege to serve, therefore, in this capacity. And the high priest was quite honored in Israel. Well, the priestly duties that is said, that Eli is doing that are going to be taken away from him. Offering sacrifices, this is one of the things that God gave to Aaron and his line. Burning incense, they burnt incense as a sign of the prayers. It was a symbol of the prayers of the people going up before God as the smoke from the incense went up. Wearing the high priest's ephod. Here, one of the things that is mentioned is this special garment that we can read about being constructed already in the book of Exodus for the high priest to wear. It's quite ornate. And there's instructions for making it in Exodus, and then it's repeated again. They made it, and you get almost the exact same thing all over again to show that they did exactly what God said. And so it was quite ornate, and the high priest alone could wear this. And then presenting fire offerings before God is mentioned here too. So these were the privileges of the priests. And God says, I took Aaron, your ancestor, I made him priest, I gave this privilege to your family, and now your sons are disregarding it. And so this prophecy is specifically aimed against Eli for not removing his sons from office. As high priest, he should have done that. And for more or less tolerating what they were doing. He did rebuke them, but he didn't do anything about it when they didn't listen. So that's part of this prophecy here. Eli's descendants will be cut off from the priesthood, but so would the descendants of his father's house, Aaron's house. That is, this is a prophecy that there will come a time when there will be no more high priest from the line of Aaron. Okay, of course that's true in our day. But the prophecy here is not simply that Eli and his line won't be priests, but his father's house, that is Aaron. And when they say father, they mean ancestor. So this is partially fulfilled, this prophecy is partially fulfilled later on in David's reign, when the high priesthood is taken away from the line of Eli and given to a new person descended from Aaron, but a different line, a man named Zadok. But it's completely fulfilled when there is no more high priesthood. And that, of course, comes about as a result of Jesus coming into the world. There is another thing here. Among Eli's descendants, there's going to be an old man in Yahweh's house again. Well, Eli's an old man. He's going to be the last one that's going to live to be old. Eli is in his 90s at this point. He's served quite a long time, and God is directly saying, "You're the last one that's going to live that long, and my judgment on your house because of this is that in your line nobody's ever going to live to be an old man again." So God, you can tell, is quite upset at Eli's handling of the high priesthood. Abiathar is Eli's grandson. Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they're going to die in a single day, we're told. Eventually Abiathar would take over the high priesthood, and he would serve in David's day along with Zadok. They had kind of a co-high priesthood. When Solomon is made king, Abiathar sides with one of Solomon's brothers who tries to become king. And so Solomon removes Abiathar altogether from the high priesthood. And at that point, there's never again someone from the house of Eli that's on the throne. So it takes a couple generations to work out, but this prophecy works out first on Eli's house, and then, of course, on the house of Aaron altogether. The rest of Eli's descendants are killed by Saul. In 1 Samuel 22, we read about this. The only one that escapes is Abiathar. Eli's descendants are serving at the tabernacle. David goes there to get Goliath's sword when he's fleeing from Saul. And Saul shows up later and blames the priests for siding with David and has them all executed. So this prophecy, is we see it played out already in the book of Samuel. And then the sign that this would happen, God gives Eli a sign. It's not going to happen all in his day. He's going to be dead when a lot of this prophecy is fulfilled. But he's given a sign. And that is, he's going to see the fact that his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, will die on the same day. And that is coming up in a few chapters. We'll get there. But in a few chapters, we learn of Hophni and Phinehas dying on the same day. So, Eli's not going to necessarily see all this happen. That's why God gives him this sign to tell him, yeah, it's going to happen. Eli shouldn't hold out any hope for anything else. The last verses, God's going to raise up a faithful priest. He's going to replace the priesthood of Aaron that was started under Moses with a faithful priest because of this unfaithfulness. There's a translation or text issue here. It says, "He will serve before my anointed one" in many English Bible translations. However, I don't think that's the best reading. The way I would say the best reading is, "My anointed one will walk before me forever." That the high priest that's going to replace this Aaron priesthood is the anointed one. That this high priest is also the Messiah. Anointed one is Messiah. And this is Jesus. Jesus is the great high priest. And Jesus ultimately fulfills this prophecy. The high priesthood under Aaron goes away. Anointed, of course, connects this with Hannah's song that we looked at last week, where God's going to strengthen the horn of his anointed one. Here now, God is going to raise up a new high priest, and this anointed high priest will walk before God forever. The writer to Hebrews makes a lot out of this, that there was an old high priesthood. When you read the book of Hebrews, there was an old high priesthood. They had to offer sacrifices every day, and they had to offer sacrifices for their own sins. But the writer to the Hebrews says, but we have a great high priest who doesn't have to do that. It's Jesus. And he's picking up on this theme in this prophecy here. So this prophecy is not only condemnation of Eli for the way he's handled the priesthood and not disciplined his sons and allowed them to become corrupt, but it's also looking forward to a greater high priest, Jesus himself. And he's the anointed one that will walk before God forever on our behalf.
Is that a textual problem?
Yeah,
Okay.
it is a textual problem. One of, unfortunately, probably the worst preserved book in the entire Bible is the book of Samuel. There's lots and lots of textual problems. And remember, when we say the Bible's inspired, we don't mean that the guys who copied it over generation to generation were inspired. Fortunately, we can usually reconstruct the text as it was written, because we have it not only in the traditional Hebrew text that's been handed down to us, but we have some extensive copies of this in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have the ancient Greek translations of Samuel. And unfortunately, there's some places where in the traditional Hebrew text that has been handed down to us from the Middle Ages is almost nonsense. But from the Dead Sea Scrolls, from the ancient Greek translations, we can make sense of it. When I wrote my commentaries on 1st and 2nd Samuel, I spent a lot of time talking about what's the correct reading in this passage and that passage and the other passage, because there's lots of these. And this is one of these textual problems where the traditional Hebrew text says one thing, but probably we should follow the Dead Sea Scrolls and the ancient Greek versions, which say something else. My anointed one will walk before me forever.
So many of these prophecies seem to have immediate thrust than the future one.
Yeah, and usually that is for just the reason that this prophet tells Eli, is that the immediate thing makes you understand that the far thing is actually going to happen. That the immediate thing is kind of a sign, as it were, that God's going to see this out to the end. And so here the almost immediate thing is the death of Hophni and Phinehas. And you even have kind of intermediate steps. You have the death of Hophni and Phinehas. You have the death of the rest of Eli's line except for Abiathar, who escapes. Then eventually you have the removal of Abiathar from the high priesthood by Solomon in favor of Zadok. And it's almost, stepwise as you work through the book of Samuel and into the First Kings. So this prophecy is one of God establishing a great high priesthood and is ultimately fulfilled in Christ. So this is now, very shortly, we just had in chapter 2, Hannah's song, which pointed forward to Jesus, is the one that God will strengthen the horn of his anointed one. Now here you have the anointed one again as high priest. And so when we get to the New Testament and we see Jesus talked about as king and priest and prophet, well, all of those are already prophesied in the Old Testament. And here's the prophecy of Jesus as priest. Okay, so when we speak of Jesus as prophet, priest, and king, that's just not just a New Testament thing, but it's already there in the Old Testament. The New Testament ties it all together for us, but it's already there. And here's one example of that. So this is a fairly important prophecy. because of its effects on the priesthood. And what we think of now as the great high priest, Jesus, who offers himself as a sacrifice. And again, the writer of the Hebrews makes that very clear to us when he says, the priests had to offer sacrifices daily on the altar, yearly on the Day of Atonement. They even had to offer sacrifices for their own sins. Jesus is a greater high priest. He offers one sacrifice for all. No more constant need of sacrifices. Jesus does it once for all, so he's the greater high priest. The writer of the Hebrews also talks about Jesus being the greater prophet. He's a greater prophet than Moses, and so forth. This gets all wrapped up for us in a nice, neat package in the New Testament, but it's here and there also in the Old Testament.
The one sacrifice once and for all.
Yeah.
Does that include fellowship, thank, offerings?
Yeah, all the sacrifices in the Old Testament are rolled up into Jesus' one sacrifice. Yeah.
Okay, not just the sin offering.
Right, yeah. And so the New Testament talks about God's people still offering sacrifices, but they're not for sin. Sacrifices of praise and thanksgiving, but not for sin. And so the writer of Hebrews says all these other sacrifices that had some connection to sin, with maybe the exception of the fellowship offering, but all the rest of them have some connection to sin, they're all done for because Jesus does the one sacrifice. A lot of interesting connections here in this prophecy. And this is, like I said, not one of the best known stories in the book of Samuel, but it is one of the more important ones in these short verses. And it not only plays out in the rest of the book of Samuel, but points us forward to Jesus in the New Testament. Notice these prophecies about Jesus and how they kind of work together. So Moses says in Deuteronomy 18, the Lord, well, that should be
Raise up.
raise up a prophet like me. Yeah. Deuteronomy 18, he says it twice in Deuteronomy 18. I will raise up a prophet like you, God says too. Moses says that the Lord will raise up a prophet like me. Then God says, Moses quotes God as saying, I will raise up a prophet like you. And then here, I will raise up for myself a faithful priest. So raising up is the theme here that God has in mind. Prophet, priest. Now the way this is tied together in Samuel is, you have this man of God who's like Moses, the man of God, coming here. So it reminds us of the prophet like Moses. You have the priest here. And then later on in the book of Samuel, you have David the great king who's promised in 2 Samuel 7 an even greater king to come after him. So we have kind of all three hinted at in the book of Samuel. The writer to Hebrews. Moses was faithful in God's house. The writer to Hebrews says Christ was faithful over God's house in a greater way. And then makes a statement that Jesus is the faithful prophet. So again, all this idea of someone who's going to be faithful in God's house. Here you have the faithful priest in God's house. Moses was a faithful prophet over God's house. And the writer to Hebrews keeps on saying, but Jesus is the ultimate faithful one. So this, all this vocabulary that we have here in this prophecy shows up fulfilled in Jesus and talk about the New Testament. Very well-known story. 1 Samuel chapter 3. So immediately after we get this prophecy against Eli's house, now we come to what are we going to see as a faithful person. It's not Eli, it's not his sons, it's Samuel. that's a long story, but maybe we have a brave person who wants to read all 21 verses for us? Okay.
The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." So he went and lay down. Again the Lord called Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel a third time, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling, as at the other time, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears of it tingle. At that time I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family from beginning to end. For I told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons made themselves contemptible, and failed to restrain them. Therefore, I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering." Samuel lay down until morning and then opened the doors of the house of the Lord. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision, but Eli called him and said, "Samuel, my son." Samuel answered, "Here I am." "What was it he said to you?" Eli asked. "Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you." So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing from him. Then Eli said, "He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word.
Okay, so here is Samuel becoming a prophet. And notice the connection back to what we just read about the prophecy against Eli's house. That God makes Samuel a prophet by basically telling him, giving his message that God's going to carry out what he prophesied to the other prophet, the other man of God.
Is there a mistranslation there? To say that then when Eli called him and asked him what to do, that Samuel choked on his orange juice before he answered?
Yeah, Samuel didn't want to tell him. I mean, you can imagine, right? This guy's the high priest. He's a respected man in Israel. Samuel's just a boy. Doesn't want to tell him. You can understand that. Well, there are two key words here, and they're both in verse 2. One is word or message. It's the same word in Hebrew, whether it's word or message. And the other is vision. And they're brought together in Samuel. Samuel receives God's message, verse 17, and he receives it in a vision, we're told, verse 15. So vision and message are important words for prophets. The prophet has a message from God for the people, and prophets also often see their message in visions. And so before we even get to the end where we're told Samuel's now a prophet, the author's hinting to us, and the way he tells the story, that Samuel is being called to be a prophet here. when God reveals to him. Now, Samuel, we're told, is lying in the holy place, verse 3. And it's almost as if he's replaced Eli. We're told in the book of Exodus that the priests were to make sure that the lamp that was burning in the tabernacle never went out. So they had to stay there during the night, make sure it was filled with oil to keep it burning. Eli's not doing that, Samuel is. Okay, Eli's sons are not doing that, they're derelict, they're off somewhere, right? Samuel's doing it. So it's almost as if Samuel's doing the duties that the failed house of Eli can't do. Eli, we find out later on, can't see, so it'd be impossible for him to do it. The irony is that Samuel's not a priest. He's from the tribe of Levi, but he's not a descendant of Aaron, right? But here he is serving in the tabernacle, lying probably in the holy place. The tabernacle has two parts, the holy place and the most holy place, holy of holies, if you will. Okay, and he's lying in the holy place where the lamp is supposed to be kept burning all the time. And so he's doing the priestly duty because the priests have failed to do their duty. So this theme is hinted at again here already in verse 3 when we find Samuel sleeping in the holy place to keep the lamp going. God calls 3 times. You probably know this story fairly well. He calls 3 times, and every time Samuel reports to Eli. That's what he figures he's supposed to do, right? When he hears somebody calling. After the second time, we're told Samuel didn't realize it was God's calling. He had never had any experience with God calling him. He did not know the Lord in the Hebrew phrase. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't know about God, he never worshiped God. That's not what it means. But sometimes know means to have a closer relationship.
Very intimate, isn't it?
Yeah, an intimate relationship, a familiar relationship. And so sometimes know is used in the Hebrew not just if I didn't have any knowledge, but rather here he didn't have this relationship where God called to him and he knew who was calling him would answer. He would learn this.
Well, but verse 1,
Yeah, the word of the Lord was rare in those days.
and there were not many visions. It seems to me that sentence pretty much sums up the book of Judges.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the reason, or that those two go together, that the word of the Lord was, nobody was listening to God, and there were no visions, or at least none that anybody was recognizing.
yeah,
And when the word is rare, the people don't have any guidance, and so they're off doing their own thing. There's nothing to control the idolatry, as it were. And that the verse, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening."
yeah,
The word finally comes. God now has someone who, for the first time in,
who knows how long, yeah.
who knows how long, who is actually willing to listen to God's word and then to be the spokesperson for communicating that out in the population.
Yeah, yeah, and so, again, we have this thing. I mean, it emphasizes how rare it was, too, when this man of God showed up to prophesy to Eli.
Yeah.
That must have been a shock because the word of the Lord was rare in those days. You didn't have visions and prophets, right? And yet, one shows up to Eli, and then the next thing you know, one shows up, they have this vision that Samuel has. Samuel shows up as one. So,
Things are
that
starting
era is
to
coming
happen.
to an end.
Yeah.
That era is coming to an end as God calls Samuel here. Samuel soon would know God, and God would prophesy through him for the rest of his life. we're going to have Samuel leading Israel. And we're going to have Samuel anointing Saul and prophesying to him. We're going to have Samuel anointing David later on in the book and serving as a prophet also for David. So, Samuel brings this era to an end, and all of a sudden we're going to have prophecy coming, quite regularly. After Samuel's death, in 2 Samuel, we still have prophets around. We're going to have Nathan prophesying to David, and another prophet named Gad, mentioned in the book of 2 Samuel. So this era of prophecy being rare is coming to an end with Samuel. So that's how pivotal Samuel is here in this whole section. And the author is giving us the call of Samuel. Now, we don't have too many calls of prophets in the Bible. Most of the prophets, we don't know how they became a prophet. Isaiah tells us his, Jeremiah tells us his, Ezekiel tells us his.
Elisha?
Elisha, perhaps, because we have Elijah, sent out to put the mantle over him. But that's a short list, considering how many prophets there are in the Old Testament. You only have 4 or 5 where we actually know how was it they became a prophet. And in this case, it's with this communication at night to Samuel as he's sleeping in the tabernacle. So it's quite a rare thing.
In David's time, the sons of the prophets come out to meet him?
No, you don't really get sons of the prophets mentioned until Elijah and Elisha, which is apparently a prophetic guild. Prophets under a kind of main prophet, which is why Elijah and then later Elisha, people call him my father, right?
Yeah.
The main prophet is the father. You do get this hinted at when Saul prophesies after he's anointed by Samuel. Samuel tells him, you're going to meet these guys who are prophets and you'll join them and prophesy with them and so forth. And afterwards, people are asking questions about
Is
this.
Saul among the prophets?
Saul among the prophets. But one of the other questions they ask, but who is their father? Meaning, who's their leader? Who's the main prophet? Is it Saul? Is it one of these other guys? So this idea of sons and fathers with prophets is kind of the main prophet, and then this kind of guild of prophets under them. And that comes up with Elijah and Elisha mainly.
And what do you think was the function of the sons of the prophets?
That's a good question.
Were they, authentic prophets? Were they?
Yeah, I think they were authentic prophets. Exactly why they're in a guild and why they're, kind of living together, working together is not always explained in Scripture, so I'm not sure. But they're treated as authentic prophets. And it's also why Elisha wants a double portion, right? When Elijah's going to heaven, what does he want? He wants a double portion. Well, right, the main heir, according to the laws in the Pentateuch, the main heir of the father gets a double portion, twice as much inheritance as the others. So he wants to be the new leader. That's what Elisha's really asking there. Okay, so usually it's the eldest son. The eldest son gets 2 shares of the inheritance. All the other sons get 1 share.
In verse 13, is there anything that would help us to understand whether God is holding Eli responsible for the actions of his independent adult children, or if he is condemning Eli for not raising his children to love God, or?
He's holding them responsible for their dereliction of duties as priests, so their adult actions as adults.
Okay.
The problem apparently with Eli is he has trouble carrying out his office as high priest because he also is thinking as father. And God is saying, no, when you're high priest, your first responsibility is to carry out your office as high priest, not to be, give your sons a break because they're your sons. Okay, so God expects him to carry out his office as high priest, and he doesn't do it. And that's what Eli's being held responsible for here. If there's a corrupt priest, the high priest is supposed to remove them. And he doesn't do that. Quite the opposite. He tells them, sons, you shouldn't do that, but then he lets them go on doing it, right? So that's the whole problem. And it's difficult, sometimes distinguishing between your office and your responsibility as parent. Sometimes you have to. That's what God's holding him responsible for. You see the same thing, by the way, if you go all the way back. If you go all the way back to the book of Leviticus, where Aaron has two sons who offer what was called strange fire before the Lord, unauthorized sacrifices, and God flames out from the altar and kills them. And Aaron is forbidden to mourn his sons, right? Because his office as high priest, he represents God. If he's mourning his sons, then it looks like God is regretting what he did. So he's not allowed to mourn his sons. The rest of Israel is, but Aaron isn't. So there again, Aaron his responsibility as high priest overrides his responsibility as father. So you have the same concept already back in the book of Leviticus. Verse 11, everybody's ears will ring or tingle, whatever it is. That expression occurs a couple times in the Bible outside of this passage, and it's always used to speak of shocking news about a calamity. So it's used in 2 Kings 21:12, and it's used in Jeremiah 19:3. Your ears will ring or tingle or something like that. That's bad news, shocking news of a calamity. And the calamity here, of course, is going to be the death of Hophni and Phinehas and the other events that happened along with it. So God's saying, it's not going to be long. I'm going to start carrying out this prophecy that the man of God brought. And Samuel now is, kind of is going to have to tell Eli that. In verse 17, it's hard to see in English, but Eli is actually placing Samuel under an oath. Somebody read 17 for us again.
What was it he said to you? Eli asked, do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you. So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing from him. Then Eli said, he is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes.
Okay, do not hide anything from me, and be it ever so severely. This is Eli's way of placing Samuel under oath, under obligation, as if he's in court, to tell the truth. May God judge you if you don't tell me this. As high priest now, he's invoking his right to force Samuel to testify, as it were. And that's exactly what's going on here. And so now Samuel, realizing this, tells it. He has to tell it. It's as if he's been called into court and made to testify. Okay. So notice the things it says about Samuel as a prophet as a result of this in verses 19 through 21. All his prophecies were fulfilled. Not a word dropped to the ground, I think it says, right? In other words, when Samuel prophesied, it came true. Now, why is this important? If you go back to Deuteronomy, when Moses talks about prophets, and Moses tells the people, how do you tell a true prophet from false prophet? Well, Moses basically gives them two tests. One is, if he prophesies something contrary to what you know is the word of God, false prophet, don't listen to him. The other one is, if he says something is going to happen, it has to happen. Not, 50-50 isn't good enough, 75% of the time isn't good enough. It has to happen. And so when the writer here says, not one word falls to the ground unfulfilled, he's saying Samuel's a true prophet. And he says the word of God, and it's always reliable. He also says in verse 20, all Israel recognized him as a prophet for Yahweh. Okay, so it's not just that, okay, his words are fulfilled, but then other people begin to recognize this guy's a genuine prophet. Okay, so Samuel is raised up as a prophet, and God is now saying to Israel, see, you've got a prophet again. Right? You didn't have anyone like this for the longest time. But now you do. We opened up the chapter with this is rare. Now it's not rare at all. They all recognize Samuel as a prophet. Which is going to be important because one of the reasons Saul ends up going to Samuel and they first encounter is because Samuel's a prophet. And they want to come and inquire of it. So this is important for the story down the road. And then we're told he continued to serve in Shiloh and prophesied there. That his prophecy is connected with Shiloh. Shiloh is the place where the tabernacle is. So this, Samuel kind of is the beginning of the end of Eli's line. Because people are now coming to Shiloh, not for Eli, not for the high priest, but for Samuel, who's prophesying. Okay, so, that we get almost the first hints of this prophecy against Eli's house being fulfilled in the fact that people are now coming for Samuel, not for Eli. Okay, so Samuel here, the author really emphasizes, in just a few verses, he really emphasizes Samuel's importance as a prophet to Israel. Questions there on, that's kind of the end of chapter 3. Any questions before we go on? I don't know if we have more handouts, but that's the end of chapter 3, and I had a new handout before, but I don't know if Judy had them ready. So you might have to go on without it, but let me bring up at least what I have on chapter 4 so we can go on. So chapter 4, when we get to chapter 4, we're going to have a story about the ark. By the way, if you find that amusing, go online. It's called the Brick Testament. And the guy does all kinds of... this guy has way too much time on his hands. Because he has all kinds of Bible stories illustrated through Legos. So this guy has way too much time on his hands. Okay. But chapters 4 through 6, the Ark of the Covenant is going to become important here. And we're going to read about things revolving around the Ark of the Covenant. Now, there are two places in the book of Samuel where the Ark of the Covenant becomes important. One is here, in chapters 4 through 6 of 1 Samuel. The second time, then we don't hear about the Ark of the Covenant for a long time, but the second time is when David decides to bring the Ark of the Covenant up to Jerusalem. And that's in 2 Samuel. And there, in those chapters, once again, we focus on the Ark of the Covenant. So twice in the book of Samuel, we have narratives that talk about the movement of the Ark of the Covenant.
Is there a stack of paper on your lectern?
This?
No, on the lectern.
No.
Okay,
So,
sorry.
yeah. Hopefully we'll get these next week. So, I should have warned her that I was probably going to make it into chapter 4. That might be my fault. But at any rate, so these guys, handling the Ark of the Covenant, very important. And this is, again, a fairly well-known Bible story. You may have encountered it in Sunday school or somewhere else. But a fairly important story about Israel and their relationship with God. Now, the Ark will have travels around Israel. It'll be up here in Shiloh. Okay, it's going to be taken to war in chapter 4, captured at Aphek, captured by the Philistines, who are going to take it to Ashdod, and then to Gath, and then to Ekron, and then they're going to decide they don't want it anymore, and to send it back, and it's going to end up at Beth Shemesh. Okay, and from Beth Shemesh it's going to be sent to Kiriath Jearim, and it's going to stay there for a long time until David brings it to Jerusalem. Okay, so that's kind of the way the ark is traveling around in the book of Samuel. Okay, in case you want to know kind of where these places are, you can picture on a map, here's Jerusalem. So it's doing this kind of interesting journey.
Was the ark kept in the Holy of Holies,
Yeah.
the most holy place? So when they hauled it out to take it to battle, they weren't taking the tabernacle with it. When it was returned,
It was not put in the tabernacle.
it was not put back in the tabernacle.
Not till David brings it to Jerusalem. So it's going to spend quite a few years without the tabernacle.
Roughly, how many miles, roughly?
If you did that whole circuit, that's about 15 miles. 15, 1-5. It's not big.
Really, it just looks.
It looks big, but yeah, it's not all that big. I mean, keep in mind,
1,500, you know?
yeah, keep in mind that Israel, you know, ancient Israel, east to west, you're talking maybe 30 miles at the widest point. It's a small land, 150 miles north to south, 30 miles widest point east to west.
See, I said 1,500 miles or something.
No, 15. 15 miles.
That doesn't add up then if you say it's 30 miles across.
At the widest point.
So this is not the widest point?
No.
Okay.
At the widest point, it's 30 miles across. Yeah. It's not a very long journey at all.
Can you define tabernacle for us?
The tabernacle was basically a portable temple. It was a tent. God commanded Moses to have this built when they were at Mount Sinai. It could be taken up and put down, okay? And the tabernacle is at various spots in various times. As we open up the book of Samuel, it's in Shiloh. But it occupies several different spots in Israel because it is portable. Now, when they were in the wilderness wandering around, they would take it up, take it down, and put it up, take it down, and put it up as they traveled from place to place. When they get into the Holy Land, it would stay at a place for a long time, but it would move from place to place. Shiloh is apparently destroyed. We're going to learn about this battle with the Philistines. About this time, when the ark is captured, Shiloh is destroyed. We know this from archaeology. And also there are hints of this elsewhere in the Old Testament about the destruction of Shiloh. It's not mentioned here in Samuel, but in the book of Psalms, for instance, Shiloh's destruction is hinted at, and also in the prophet Jeremiah. So Shiloh apparently was destroyed in the aftermath of this battle when the ark is captured. So the tabernacle will eventually move, and we find it again in the book of Samuel at a place called Nob, and it's where the priests at Nob are killed. This is, I mentioned earlier, Saul wiping out most of Eli's descendants. That happened at Nob. So apparently the tabernacle is moving too. David reunites the two of them in Jerusalem.
The high priest always with the tabernacle?
Supposedly, yeah, but it doesn't always work out that way. The high priest is supposed to be with the tabernacle all the time, but it doesn't always work out. Yeah. It's at the tabernacle where the sacrifices, the Day of Atonement takes place in the tabernacle until there's a temple. Okay. So, yeah, the tabernacle is portable and it can move around, but it's basically a temple. But it's not a, brick and mortar temple. It's a tent temple.
So when the ark was not there, no sacrifices because the altar doesn't go
Yeah,
with
God's presence is not there because God's presence is with the ark.
that. Right.
So this is serious stuff when the ark is captured. The ark is and sometimes called in the Old Testament the ark of God's presence. So God's presence in a special way is there. The ark is God's throne. It's his seat. And so it's important stuff.
Can you elaborate on, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Is God with the Philistines then when they have the ark?
Yeah, but not for good. He's with them, but they wish he wasn't, as we'll find out.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the ark itself?
Yeah, the ark it's a box. On top of it are two cherubim, two angels, which form God's throne. Okay, it's all overlaid in gold. Okay, within this box, we learn in the books of Moses that the 10 Commandments are put in there. The tables of the law, probably more than 10 Commandments, but the tables of the law are put in there. Eventually, Aaron's rod that buds to show that God has chosen his line as high priest, that's put in there. A pot of manna is put in, we're told. The ark, when it travels, you're not allowed to touch it. Okay, it has, if we go back to that, I think the brick, I kind of got it right. You'll see there's these poles on the side. There were rings on the side of the ark. You were not to touch it. Instead, the priests or the Levites who carried it were to put these poles through the rings and carry it on their shoulders. That's how it was supposed to be transported around.
But those sticks are longer than took more than just 4 people.
Right, yeah.
Nearly a quarter-ton of weight there.
Right, yeah. It took more than 4 people, and they were much longer than that, but hey, I only do so much with Lego. Okay, so, yeah, the ark's in the most holy place. God's special presence there is above the ark. The high priest is only allowed to go into the most holy place once a year. Nobody else is allowed in anyway. But the high priest only goes in once a year on the Day of Atonement in the fall with the blood of the sacrifice that he sprinkles before God on the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so the Ark is kind of a symbol of God's presence with Israel, and God, indeed God is said to be there. And when they first set up the Ark in the tabernacle, back in the book of Exodus, we're told people standing, outside in the courtyard of the tabernacle could see the glory of God by looking into there. Okay. Okay, well, we're just about out of time. Maybe we won't read the first thing, but the first thing we're going to read about when we come back next time is how the ark is captured by the Philistines. So this is one of the great disasters that's going to befall, and it will be the beginning also of the fulfillment of the prophecy against